The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine parade grounds of the United States Air Force Academy as Cadet Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform for the 100th time. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the fabric, knowing that today would determine whether she had what it took to earn her wings or if she would wash out like so many others before her. Sarah had always felt like she didn't belong here among the sons and daughters of military dynasties and wealthy families. While her classmates talked casually about their father's war stories and their grandfather's medals, Sarah kept quiet about her own background. Her father worked double shifts at a factory in East Los Angeles, and her mother cleaned office buildings at night to help pay the bills. They had sacrificed everything to give her this chance, selling their car and taking out loans they couldn't afford just to help her through the application process. The other cadets seemed to glide through their training with an ease that Sarah envied. They spoke the military language like it was their native tongue, understood references to famous battles and legendary commanders that Sarah had to look up later in the library. She studied twice as hard as anyone else, spent her free time memorizing regulations while others relaxed, and still felt like she was constantly playing catch-up. "Martinez, you look like you're about to throw up," said Cadet James Wellington III, whose grandfather had been a 4-star general and whose family name graced buildings throughout the academy. His perfectly pressed uniform and confident smile made Sarah feel even more out of place. "Maybe you should sit this one out. I'm sure they'd understand if someone from your background found this too challenging." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had learned early in her time here that responding to Wellington's subtle digs only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the task ahead. Today was the final evaluation for their advanced tactical training course, and the results would largely determine their future assignments upon graduation. The training scenario was designed to test everything they had learned over the past 4 years. Each cadet would be given command of a simulated air squadron and tasked with completing a complex mission involving multiple objectives, hostile forces, and limited resources. The exercise had been developed by some of the finest military minds in the country, and it was notorious for its difficulty. As the cadets filed into the simulation center, Sarah noticed the imposing figure of General Patricia Hayes, observing from the observation deck. General Hayes was a legend in the Air Force, known for her brilliant tactical mind and her role in several classified operations that had helped reshape modern warfare. She rarely attended cadet evaluations, which meant that something important was happening today. Sarah took her place at the simulation console and began reviewing the mission parameters. The scenario placed her in command of a squadron tasked with providing air support for a humanitarian mission in hostile territory. Enemy forces controlled most of the airspace, civilian evacuations were ongoing, and her fuel and ammunition were limited. To make matters worse, the weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, and communications with ground forces were intermittent at best. As the simulation began, Sarah felt her training take over. She quickly assessed the tactical situation and began deploying her aircraft in a pattern that would maximize their effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Her fingers flew across the controls as she coordinated multiple aircraft, managed resources, and adapted to changing conditions on the battlefield. What Sarah didn't realize was that her approach to the problem was unlike anything the instructors had seen before. While most cadets relied on standard tactics and procedures they had memorized from textbooks, Sarah was improvising solutions that drew from her unique perspective and experiences. Growing up in a tough neighborhood had taught her to think creatively about problems and to find opportunities where others saw only obstacles. Her family's struggles had instilled in her a deep understanding of what it meant to make every resource count, and her outsider status had forced her to observe and learn in ways that privileged cadets never had to. As the simulation progressed, Sarah found herself facing a critical decision point. The standard tactical manual called for a direct assault on the enemy positions, but Sarah could see that this approach would result in heavy casualties and might jeopardize the civilian evacuation. Instead, she began implementing a complex series of feints and misdirections that would draw enemy forces away from the evacuation routes while creating opportunities for her squadron to strike at vulnerable targets. The other cadets watched their own simulations with growing frustration as their conventional approaches failed to achieve the mission objectives. One by one, they were forced to restart their scenarios or accept partial mission failure. The instructors exchanged puzzled glances as they monitored the results, clearly not expecting this level of difficulty. But Sarah's simulation was different. Her unconventional tactics were working with a precision that surprised even her. Enemy formations were falling into her carefully laid traps, civilian evacuations were proceeding ahead of schedule, and her squadron was achieving objectives that seemed impossible just minutes earlier. From the observation deck, General Hayes leaned forward with interest. She had designed parts of this simulation herself, based on real-world scenarios that had challenged even experienced combat commanders. To see a cadet not only navigating these challenges but actually excelling at them was remarkable. Sarah's squadron was now deep in enemy territory, having successfully neutralized several key targets while protecting the evacuation convoys. But the simulation wasn't over yet. The final phase would test her ability to extract her forces while maintaining mission objectives under extreme pressure. As enemy reinforcements began arriving on the scene, Sarah found herself outnumbered 3-1 with limited ammunition and fuel running low. The standard procedure would be to call for extraction and accept whatever objectives had been achieved. But Sarah could see an opportunity that others might miss. She began repositioning her aircraft in what appeared to be a retreat, but was actually a carefully orchestrated maneuver that would bring the enemy forces into a vulnerable position. Using the terrain and weather conditions to her advantage, she was setting up a trap that would allow her small squadron to inflict maximum damage on a much larger force. The simulation reached its climax as Sarah's plan unfolded with clockwork precision. Her aircraft struck at exactly the right moment, using the enemy's own momentum against them and creating a chain reaction that decimated their formation. In the space of just a few minutes, she had turned a hopeless situation into a decisive victory. As the simulation ended, the room fell silent. The instructors stared at their monitors in disbelief, checking and rechecking the results. Sarah had not only completed all mission objectives, but had done so with 0 casualties and minimal resource expenditure. It was a performance that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Wellington and the other cadets looked at their own failed simulations with growing resentment. They had been outperformed by someone they had consistently underestimated. Someone whose background they had used as ammunition for their subtle mockery and dismissal. Sarah sat back in her chair, hardly believing what she had just accomplished. For 4 years, she had doubted herself and questioned whether she belonged here. She had endured countless moments of feeling inferior and out of place. But in this moment, she realized that her different background wasn't a weakness. It was her greatest strength. The experiences that had made her feel like an outsider had also given her a unique perspective that none of her classmates possessed. Her ability to think creatively under pressure, to find solutions where others saw only problems, and to make the most of limited resources, weren't weaknesses to be overcome. They were advantages that set her apart. General Hayes descended from the observation deck with a purposeful stride. Her expression was unreadable as she approached the simulation stations, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she had witnessed something significant. The general's reputation preceded her wherever she went. She was known for her exacting standards and her ability to spot potential in unexpected places. Cadets who earned her recognition often went on to distinguished careers, while those who disappointed her rarely forgot the experience. As General Hayes moved through the room, examining the results from each simulation station, Sarah felt her heart racing. She tried to read the general's expression, looking for any sign of what was coming next. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone waited to see how their performances would be evaluated. Finally, General Hayes reached Sarah's station and paused to review the detailed results of her simulation. The general's eyes moved across the data with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen thousands of such evaluations, but something in her expression suggested that this one was different. Sarah held her breath as the general's evaluation continued. Everything she had worked for over the past 4 years was riding on this moment. All the late nights studying, all the extra training sessions, all the time she had pushed through when others told her she didn't belong. It all came down to this. The general's pause seemed to stretch on forever, and Sarah could feel the eyes of her classmates boring into her. Wellington and his friends were probably hoping to see her finally get her comeuppance, to be put back in what they considered her proper place. But something told Sarah that this moment was going to change everything. General Hayes finally looked up from the monitor, her steel-gray eyes meeting Sarah's nervous gaze. There was something in those eyes that Sarah had never seen before when anyone looked at her. Respect, not pity, not tolerance, not the condescending acknowledgement she had grown accustomed to, but genuine respect. The general's next words would determine not just Sarah's immediate future, but the entire trajectory of her military career. In the silence of that room, with the weight of 4 years of struggle and determination behind her, Sarah waited to learn whether all her sacrifices had been worth it. The moment stretched on, pregnant with possibility, as General Hayes prepared to render her judgment on a performance that had surprised everyone in the room. For Sarah Martinez, the girl who had never quite fit in, the girl who had always questioned whether she belonged, this was the moment when everything would finally become clear. General Hayes cleared her throat, and the entire simulation center fell into an expectant hush. Every cadet, instructor, and observer focused their attention on the decorated officer whose opinion could make or break careers before they even began. Cadet Martinez. The general's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Your performance in today's simulation was unprecedented. Sarah felt her stomach drop. In her experience, unprecedented was rarely followed by good news. She braced herself for criticism, for the inevitable explanation of how her unconventional approach had violated proper protocol or failed to meet some standard she hadn't considered. I've been observing cadet training for over 2 decades, General Hayes continued, her gaze never leaving Sarah's face. I've seen thousands of young officers attempt this particular scenario. Most follow the textbook approaches they've memorized. Some try to innovate within acceptable parameters. But what you did today. She paused, and Sarah was certain she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the silent room. What you did today demonstrated a level of tactical creativity and situational awareness that I rarely see even in seasoned combat veterans. You didn't just complete the mission objectives. You redefined what was possible within the parameters of the scenario. If you didn't just complete the mission objectives. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but instead of pain, she felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Validation. Real, genuine recognition from someone whose opinion truly mattered. But General Hayes wasn't finished. However, she continued, and Sarah's momentary elation crashed back down to earth. Exceptional performance in simulation is only part of what makes a great officer. The real test comes in how you handle the pressure of command, how you lead others, and how you make decisions when lives are actually on the line. Sarah nodded, trying to process the mixed message. Was this praise or criticism? Had she succeeded or failed? The general's expression remained unreadable, giving no clues about where this conversation was heading. Over the next 6 months, leading up to graduation, you'll be participating in an advanced leadership program that I personally oversee, General Hayes announced. It's designed for cadets who show exceptional potential but need real-world experience to reach their full capabilities. Sarah's mind raced. This sounded like an opportunity, but experience had taught her to be cautious about anything that singled her out from her classmates. Special attention often meant special scrutiny, and special scrutiny usually revealed all the ways she didn't measure up to the Academy's standards. The program will involve additional training scenarios, mentorship with senior officers, and practical leadership exercises with active duty personnel, the general explained. It's demanding. It's intensive. And not everyone who enters the program successfully completes it. From across the room, Sarah could feel Wellington and his friends watching with expressions of barely concealed resentment. They had expected to be the ones receiving special recognition, the ones being invited into exclusive programs and advanced opportunities. To see Sarah, the outsider, the charity case from East LA, being singled out for such attention was clearly galling to them. I'll need your answer by tomorrow morning, General Hayes said. But I should warn you. This program doesn't just test your tactical abilities. It examines your character, your judgment under pressure, and your ability to earn the respect of those you'll command. Many cadets who excel in simulation find that real leadership requires skills they never knew they lacked. Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. Here it was again. The implication that she might not have what it took, that her background might finally catch up with her. The general was giving her an opportunity, but she was also making it clear that this opportunity came with the very real possibility of spectacular failure. "I understand, General," Sarah managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for considering me for the program." General Hayes nodded curtly and turned to address the rest of the class about their simulation results, but Sarah barely heard the words. Her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. This was everything she had dreamed of: recognition, opportunity, a chance to prove herself on a larger stage. But it was also everything she feared: increased scrutiny, higher stakes, and more ways to fail publicly. As the debriefing session concluded and the cadets began filing out of the simulation center, Sarah found herself walking alone. Her classmates either avoided her entirely or shot her looks that ranged from envious to openly hostile. She had become accustomed to being an outsider, but today's events had created a new kind of isolation. Well. Wellington's voice came from behind her as she walked across the courtyard. "Looks like someone's moving up in the world." Sarah turned to find Wellington flanked by two of his closest friends, Cadets Harrison and Blake. All three came from military families that could trace their service back generations, and all three had expected to be the stars of their class. "Must be nice to get special treatment," Harrison added, his tone dripping with false congeniality. "I guess they need to fill their diversity quotas somehow." The words stung because they echoed Sarah's own deepest fears. Was she being selected because of her performance, or because she represented something the Academy needed to showcase? The doubt that had plagued her for 4 years came rushing back with renewed intensity. "My performance spoke for itself," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice level. "Did it?" Blake stepped forward, his expression challenging. "Or are you just the token success story they need to prove their outreach programs work?" Sarah felt her hands clench into fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting into a confrontation now would only validate their assumptions about her character and potentially jeopardize the opportunity she had just been offered. "I earned my place here," she said simply. "And I'll earn whatever comes next." "I earned." Wellington laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see about that. This advanced program isn't like your simulation games. When you're dealing with real officers, real missions, real consequences, that's when we'll find out what you're really made of." As the 3 cadets walked away, Sarah stood alone in the courtyard, their words echoing in her mind. Part of her knew they were just being cruel, lashing out because someone they had consistently underestimated had outperformed them. But another part of her wondered if they might be right. That evening, Sarah sat in her small dormitory room, staring at the letter of acceptance she needed to sign for General Hayes's program. The opportunity was everything she had worked toward, but the doubts were overwhelming. What if she really was just a token? What if her simulation performance had been a fluke? What if she got into the program and proved that Wellington and his friends had been right about her all along? She thought about calling her parents, but she knew what they would say. They would tell her to take the opportunity, to believe in herself, to remember how hard she had worked to get here. But they couldn't understand the pressure she faced every day. The constant feeling of being an imposter in a world where everyone else seemed to belong naturally. Instead, Sarah found herself walking to the Academy library, seeking solace in the one place where her different background had always been an advantage. While other cadets socialized or relaxed, Sarah had spent countless hours here, reading everything she could get her hands on about military history, tactics, and leadership. As she settled into her usual corner table, Sarah pulled out a biography of General Hayes that she had read months earlier. She flipped through the pages, looking for something. She wasn't sure what, until she found the passage that had stuck with her before. General Hayes had written about her own early career, about feeling out of place as one of the first women to break into combat roles. She had described the constant pressure to prove herself, the whispers about special treatment and lowered standards, and the crushing weight of representing not just herself but everyone who looked like her. "The greatest enemy of potential," Hayes had written, "is not lack of opportunity, but the doubt that we deserve the opportunities we're given. Every barrier broken, every ceiling shattered, begins with someone deciding that their difference is not a weakness to overcome, but a strength to embrace. Sarah read the passage several times, letting the words sink in. She thought about the simulation, about how her unconventional approach had succeeded where traditional methods might have failed. Maybe Wellington was right that the advanced program would be different, more challenging, more revealing. But maybe that wasn't something to fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Papa and I are so proud of you, Mija. Whatever opportunity comes next, remember that you've earned everything you've achieved." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then picked up her pen and signed the acceptance letter. She was tired of doubting herself, tired of living in fear of not being good enough. If she was going to fail, at least she would fail while reaching for something meaningful. The next morning, Sarah arrived at General Hayes's office 10 minutes early, her signed letter in hand. The general's assistant showed her into a spacious office lined with commendations, photographs, and mementos from a distinguished career. General Hayes looked up from her desk and gestured for Sarah to take a seat. "I'm pleased you decided to accept," she said, taking the letter. "But before we begin, I want to address something that I suspect has been weighing on your mind." Sarah tensed, unsure what was coming. "You're wondering if you were selected because of your performance or because of who you are," the general said bluntly. "It's a natural question, given the environment you've been operating in here." The directness of the statement caught Sarah off guard, but she nodded. "Let me be clear," General Hayes continued. "I don't care where you came from, what your parents do for a living, or what your classmates think about you. I care about results. Yesterday's simulation was based on a real mission I commanded 15 years ago in Afghanistan. I've never seen anyone navigate those challenges with the creativity and precision you demonstrated." Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, but the general wasn't finished. "However," Hayes said, "that performance was just the entry fee. What happens next will determine whether you have what it takes to lead in the real world. And I should warn you, the people you'll be working with won't know or care about your simulation scores. You'll have to prove yourself all over again, every single day." The general stood and walked to her window, looking out at the academy grounds. "The program starts Monday. You'll be working with a joint task force that includes officers from all service branches, senior enlisted personnel, and civilian contractors. Your first assignment will be to lead a team in developing tactical responses to emerging threats in urban environments." Sarah's pulse quickened. This wasn't just advanced training. This was real work, with real implications. "You'll have resources at your disposal that most officers don't see until they're well into their careers," General Hayes explained. "But you'll also have visibility that can make or break your future in the service. Success here opens doors to positions most people only dream about. Failure." She paused and turned back to Sarah. "Failure is very public and very final." The stakes were clear, and they were higher than Sarah had imagined. But for the first time in 4 years, she felt ready for the challenge. The doubt that had plagued her wasn't gone, but it had transformed into determination. "I understand, General," Sarah said. "I won't let you down." General Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I don't think you will. But more importantly, don't let yourself down. You've earned this opportunity through your own merit. Now prove that my confidence in you wasn't misplaced." As Sarah left the office, she felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. The path ahead was uncertain and undoubtedly difficult, but for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she truly belonged here. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonably cold wind sweeping across the academy grounds, but Sarah barely noticed the weather as she made her way to the classified briefing facility where General Hayes' advanced leadership program would begin. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her bearing confident despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. The briefing room was unlike anything Sarah had seen during her 4 years at the academy. Instead of the standard classroom setup, this space resembled a modern command center, complete with multiple screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds, satellite imagery, and tactical overlays. The technology alone suggested that whatever they would be working on here went far beyond academic exercises. As Sarah entered, She found herself face to face with 12 other participants. But these weren't fellow cadets. The group included active duty officers ranging from lieutenant to colonel, senior enlisted personnel with decades of experience, and several individuals in civilian clothes whose presence suggested involvement with intelligence agencies or defense contractors. The diversity of experience and expertise in the room was immediately intimidating. While Sarah had excelled among her academy peers, she was now the most junior person present by several years. The weight of being the only cadet in a room full of seasoned professionals settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Ladies and gentlemen, General Hayes entered the room with her characteristic purposeful stride. Welcome to Project Overwatch. For the next 6 months, you'll be working as a joint task force to develop tactical responses to emerging urban warfare threats. The scenarios you'll be analyzing are based on real intelligence, and your recommendations will influence actual policy decisions. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't just an advanced training program. They were being asked to contribute to actual military planning at the highest levels. Your team leader for this project will be Cadet Martinez, General Hayes announced, and Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could see the mix of surprise, skepticism, and outright disbelief on the faces around her. A colonel with combat patches from 3 different theaters of operation was now expected to take direction from someone who had never even completed basic training. General. Colonel Marcus Thompson spoke up, his voice carefully controlled but clearly strained. With all due respect, perhaps there's been some mistake. Cadet Martinez lacks the operational experience that this kind of project requires. General Hayes's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the slight hardening around her eyes that suggested the colonel had just made a significant error in judgment. Colonel Thompson, the general replied coolly. Cadet Martinez was selected for this position based on demonstrated tactical brilliance and innovative thinking. Your job is to provide the operational experience and institutional knowledge that will help her succeed. Her job is to challenge conventional thinking and find solutions that experience alone might overlook. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah could see the resentment building among the more senior participants. But she also noticed a few individuals who seemed intrigued by the unusual arrangement. Major Lisa Chen, an intelligence officer with expertise in urban warfare, leaned forward slightly. What specific qualifications led to this selection? She asked, her tone neutral but clearly probing. General Hayes gestured to the main screen, which suddenly displayed the results of Sarah's simulation exercise. Last week, Cadet Martinez completed a tactical scenario that has challenged our best officers for over a decade. Not only did she achieve all mission objectives, she did so with methods that our senior instructors are now incorporating into their own training curricula. Sarah watched the faces around her as the simulation data scrolled across the screen. Some expressions shifted from skepticism toward interest, while others remained stubbornly doubtful. Simulation is one thing, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran with 22 years of service, said bluntly. Real operations are something else entirely. People die when leaders make mistakes. The sergeant's words cut deep because they echoed Sarah's own deepest fears. She knew that her classmates' criticism about her background was unfair, but concerns about her lack of real-world experience were entirely valid. You're absolutely right, Master Sergeant. Sarah spoke for the first time since entering the room. I don't have operational experience. And I won't pretend that simulation results make me qualified to lead seasoned professionals like yourselves. The admission seemed to catch everyone off guard, including General Hayes. However, Sarah continued, I do have something that might be valuable to this project. I have a perspective that comes from outside the traditional military framework. My background has forced me to look at problems differently, to find solutions with limited resources, and to think creatively when conventional approaches fail. She paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. I'm not here to replace your expertise or to ignore your experience. I'm here to ask different questions, to challenge assumptions, and to help this team find innovative solutions to complex problems. But I can only do that if you're willing to give me a chance to prove that different perspectives have value. The room fell quiet as the team members processed her words. Sarah had taken a calculated risk by acknowledging her limitations while asserting her potential value. The next few moments would determine whether the gamble paid off. Colonel Thompson was the first to respond. "Well," he said slowly, "at least you're honest about what you don't know. That's more than I can say for some junior officers I've worked with." Major Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And the General's point about challenging conventional thinking is valid. Sometimes we get so locked into standard procedures that we miss obvious solutions." Master Sergeant Rodriguez crossed his arms but didn't voice further objection, which Sarah took as a cautiously positive sign. General Hayes stepped forward. "Your first assignment is to analyze intelligence reports from 3 separate urban conflict zones and develop tactical recommendations for similar scenarios that might emerge in the future. You have access to classified satellite imagery, communications, intercepts, and after-action reports from recent operations." She gestured to a stack of briefing folders on the conference table. "The clock starts now. I expect preliminary findings in 72 hours, with full tactical recommendations due by the end of the week. Dr. Amanda Foster from the Defense Intelligence Agency will be your primary intelligence liaison." A woman in civilian clothes stepped forward, extending her hand to Sarah. "Cadet Martinez, I look forward to working with you. I should mention that the scenarios you'll be analyzing represent some of our most challenging current operational concerns." As General Hayes left the room, Sarah found herself truly in command for the first time in her life. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. "All right, everyone," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's start by reviewing what we're dealing with." The next few hours revealed the complexity of their assignment. The intelligence reports painted a picture of rapidly evolving urban warfare scenarios where traditional military tactics were proving inadequate. Enemy forces were using civilian populations as shields, while exploiting infrastructure vulnerabilities in ways that conventional responses couldn't address. As the team worked through the data, Sarah began to see patterns that reminded her of challenges she had faced growing up. The enemy tactics weren't unlike the strategies she had observed in her own neighborhood. Making use of limited resources, exploiting the advantages of local knowledge, and turning environmental constraints into tactical advantages. "What if we're approaching this backwards?" Sarah suggested during their second day of analysis. "Instead of trying to impose our tactical framework on these environments, what if we adapted their methods to our objectives?" Colonel Thompson looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" "These enemy forces are succeeding because they understand their environment intimately," Sarah explained, moving to the whiteboard. "They know which buildings have the strongest foundations, which streets flood during heavy rain, which routes provide the best sightlines. They're not fighting against the urban environment. They're using it as a weapon." Major Chen leaned forward with interest. "You're suggesting we develop tactics that work with urban infrastructure instead of trying to impose control over it?" "Exactly," Sarah said, warming to the concept. "What if we stopped thinking about urban warfare as military operations in a city and started thinking about them as city operations with military components?" The idea was unconventional, but as the team began exploring its implications, they discovered possibilities that none of them had considered before. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had initially been the most skeptical of Sarah's leadership, found himself contributing insights about infrastructure vulnerabilities that could be leveraged for defensive purposes. Dr. Foster provided intelligence about enemy supply chains that suddenly made sense when viewed through the lens of urban logistics, rather than traditional military supply lines. Colonel Thompson's extensive operational experience proved invaluable in translating these theoretical concepts into practical tactical applications. By the third day, the team had developed a preliminary framework that completely reimagined urban warfare tactics. Instead of trying to control territory through conventional means, their approach focused on controlling information flow, resource distribution, and population movement, using methods that worked with urban systems rather than against them. "This is either brilliant or completely insane, Doctor," Foster commented as she reviewed their initial findings. "You're essentially proposing that we turn city infrastructure into a tactical asset. It's not that different from naval warfare," Sarah pointed out. "Ships don't try to control the ocean. They learn to use currents, weather patterns, and geographic features to their advantage. Why shouldn't urban warfare work the same way? The breakthrough came when Master Sergeant Rodriguez suggested applying the framework to one of the specific scenarios in their intelligence briefings. The case involved enemy forces that had been successfully evading coalition troops in a major metropolitan area for months, using the city's infrastructure to disappear and reappear, seemingly at will. Traditional tactical responses had failed because they treated the city as an obstacle to overcome rather than a system to understand. Sarah's team began mapping the enemy's activities not against military terrain features, but against urban systems, transportation networks, utility grids, communication infrastructure, and population flow patterns. "Look at this," Major Chen said, highlighting a pattern on the digital map display. "They're not just hiding in the city, they're using it like a machine. Water system maintenance schedules, subway timetables, power grid load patterns. They're coordinating their activities with the city's operational rhythms." The revelation was stunning. The enemy wasn't just familiar with the urban environment, they were integrated into it. Their success came from understanding that modern cities were complex adaptive systems, and they had learned to operate within those systems rather than against them. If we can predict the city's operational patterns, Sarah realized, we can predict their activities. And if we can predict their activities, we can be waiting for them, Colonel Thompson finished, his excitement building. Instead of chasing them through the city, we let the city bring them to us. The tactical implications were profound. Traditional urban warfare had focused on controlling physical space, but Sarah's approach suggested that controlling information and resource flows might be far more effective. By understanding how cities actually functioned as systems, military forces could leverage those systems to achieve objectives that would be impossible through conventional means. As the week progressed, the team refined their approach and began developing specific tactical recommendations. The work was intense and demanding, requiring everyone to think beyond their traditional areas of expertise. But the results were undeniably impressive. Sarah found herself growing more confident as a leader, not because she had all the answers, but because she had learned to ask the right questions. Her role wasn't to be the smartest person in the room. It was to help the smartest people in the room work together effectively. Colonel Thompson, who had initially questioned her appointment, became one of her strongest supporters. "I've worked with a lot of junior officers," he told her privately, "and most of them try to prove they belong by pretending to know everything. You prove you belong by making everyone else smarter." The comment meant more to Sarah than any simulation score or academic achievement ever had. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she had found her place in the military hierarchy. Not as someone trying to fit into an existing mold, but as someone who could help reshape that mold when necessary. As their deadline approached, Sarah realized that the project had become about more than just tactical innovation. It had become a proving ground for a new kind of military leadership. One that valued diverse perspectives and unconventional thinking alongside traditional experience and institutional knowledge. The question now was whether their work would be accepted by the broader military establishment, or whether their innovations would be dismissed as the untested theories of an inexperienced cadet and her team of misfits. The presentation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff was scheduled for Friday morning in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room. Sarah had never imagined that her cadet career would lead her to this moment. Standing before the highest levels of military leadership, preparing to present tactical innovations that could reshape how America approached urban warfare. The team had worked around the clock to prepare their materials, refining their analysis and developing detailed implementation strategies. Their findings were groundbreaking, but Sarah knew that groundbreaking ideas weren't always welcome in institutions built on tradition and proven methods. General Hayes had provided minimal guidance for the presentation beyond emphasizing its importance. "The Joint Chiefs don't have time for academic theories or untested concepts," she had warned. "You need to prove that your ideas can work in the real world, with real soldiers, facing real threats." As Sarah and her team arrived at the Pentagon, the magnitude of the moment hit her fully. The building itself was a symbol of American military might, housing the leadership responsible for protecting national interests around the globe. The fact that she, A cadet from East Los Angeles whose parents had never set foot in Washington, D.C., was about to brief these leaders seemed almost surreal. The security screening process was intense, befitting the classified nature of their work. Sarah's team underwent multiple identity verifications and background checks before being escorted through corridors lined with portraits of military leaders whose names filled history books. "Nervous?" Colonel Thompson asked as they waited in a secure holding area adjacent to the briefing room. "Terrified," Sarah admitted honestly. "But also excited. How often do you get the chance to potentially change how the military thinks about urban warfare?" Major Chen smiled at Sarah's honesty. "You know, when this project started, I thought General Hayes had lost her mind putting a cadet in charge. But watching you work these past few weeks has been impressive. You have a gift for seeing patterns that the rest of us miss." Master Sergeant Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "I've been in the military for over 2 decades, and I've seen a lot of leaders try to impress people with what they know. You impress people by helping them discover what they didn't know they knew." The comments meant everything to Sarah, representing validation from professionals whose respect she had earned through performance rather than rank or position. But she knew that the real test lay ahead in that briefing room. At precisely 0900 hours, they were escorted into a conference room that seemed to embody the weight of military history. The Joint Chiefs were already assembled, the most senior military officers from each service branch, along with key advisors and intelligence officials whose decisions shaped global strategy. General Hayes performed the introductions with military efficiency, but Sarah caught the subtle surprise on several faces when her role as team leader was announced. Clearly, some of the attendees hadn't been briefed on the unconventional leadership structure of the project. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hayes began, "Project Overwatch was designed to challenge conventional thinking about urban warfare tactics. What you're about to hear represents 6 months of intensive analysis by a joint task force examining emerging threats in metropolitan environments." Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Thank you, General Hayes. Chiefs, the urban warfare challenges we face today require us to fundamentally rethink how we approach military operations in metropolitan environments." She gestured to the main screen, which displayed a satellite image of a sprawling cityscape. "Traditional tactics focus on controlling territory through conventional means, but modern urban environments are complex adaptive systems where success requires understanding infrastructure, population dynamics, and resource flows as much as terrain and sightlines." The presentation that followed was the culmination of months of intensive work, but Sarah delivered it with a confidence that surprised even her. She walked the Joint Chiefs through their analysis of enemy tactics, showing how adversaries had learned to exploit urban systems rather than simply hide within them. "The key insight," Sarah explained, "is that cities aren't just terrain to be controlled. They're machines to be understood. Water systems, power grids, transportation networks, communication infrastructure. These all create patterns that can be predicted and leveraged." Admiral Rebecca Martinez, the Chief of Naval Operations, leaned forward with interest. "You're suggesting that infrastructure analysis should be as important as traditional intelligence gathering?" "More than that," Sarah replied. "We're suggesting that infrastructure is intelligence. In urban environments, understanding how a city functions as a system provides tactical advantages that traditional reconnaissance can't match." The presentation continued with detailed case studies showing how their framework applied to real-world scenarios. Sarah's team had taken the intelligence briefings they'd been given and completely reimagined the tactical responses, developing strategies that worked with urban complexity rather than against it. General Michael Patterson, the Army Chief of Staff, studied the tactical overlays with growing interest. "These approaches are unconventional. What makes you confident they would work in actual operations?" Colonel Thompson stepped forward. "Sir, we've tested these concepts against historical scenarios where traditional tactics failed. In every case, the urban systems approach identified opportunities and vulnerabilities that conventional analysis missed. More importantly," Major Chen added, "enemy forces are already using these methods against us. They're succeeding because they understand urban systems better than we do." Our framework levels the playing field by giving our forces the same systematic understanding. The questions that followed were probing and intense. The Joint Chiefs challenged every aspect of their analysis, tested their assumptions, and demanded detailed explanations for their conclusions. Sarah found herself drawing on every aspect of her training and experience, but also on insights that came from her unique background and perspective. When General Patricia Wilson, the Air Force Chief of Staff, asked about resource requirements for implementing these tactics, Sarah was able to speak from personal experience about making the most of limited assets. When Admiral Martinez questioned the psychological impact on troops operating in unfamiliar urban environments, Sarah drew on her own experiences of adapting to environments where she felt out of place. The soldiers implementing these tactics don't need to understand every aspect of urban systems theory, Sarah explained. They need to understand specific patterns and indicators that are relevant to their missions. It's like learning to read the weather. You don't need to be a meteorologist to recognize storm clouds. The presentation lasted over 2 hours, but Sarah felt like time had compressed into a single intense moment. When she finally concluded with their implementation recommendations, the room fell silent as the Joint Chiefs absorbed the implications of what they had heard. General Hayes spoke first. Questions or comments from the chiefs? Admiral Martinez was the first to respond. The theoretical framework is sound, and the case studies are compelling. But this represents a significant departure from established doctrine. Are we prepared to bet lives on untested tactics? With respect, Admiral, Master Sergeant Rodriguez interjected. Our current tactics aren't working in these environments. We're already betting lives. We're just not winning those bets. General Patterson studied the data displays for a long moment. The enemy adaptation patterns you've identified are concerning. If adversaries are evolving faster than our tactical responses, we need to evolve faster ourselves. The discussion that followed was intense but professional, with the Joint Chiefs examining the proposal from every angle. Sarah watched as the most senior military leaders in the country debated ideas that had emerged from her team's unconventional approach to problem-solving. Finally, General Hayes called for a decision. The question before us is whether to authorize field testing of these tactical innovations. The risks are significant, but the potential advantages are substantial. General Patterson looked directly at Sarah. Cadet Martinez, if we approve field testing, would you be willing to participate in the implementation phase? Your insights were crucial to developing these concepts, and your perspective might be equally valuable in making them work operationally. The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Field testing meant real operations, real soldiers, real consequences. It meant stepping beyond the safe realm of theory and simulation into a world where her decisions could cost lives. Sir, Sarah replied, her voice firm despite her racing pulse. I would consider it an honor to contribute to the implementation in whatever capacity would be most useful. The Joint Chiefs exchanged glances, and Sarah sensed some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, General Hayes nodded. Project Overwatch is approved for limited field testing, she announced. Implementation will begin with advisory missions in selected urban environments, with full operational deployment contingent on demonstrated effectiveness. The room erupted in quiet activity as staff members began coordinating follow-up actions and implementation timelines. Sarah stood in the center of it all, trying to process what had just happened. Colonel Thompson approached her with the expression of genuine pride. Outstanding work, Sarah. You've just changed how the military thinks about urban warfare. But Sarah's mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that lay before them. Field testing meant proving their theories under the ultimate conditions, real operations with real stakes. Success would validate everything she had worked toward, but failure would expose her team to criticism and potentially cost soldiers their lives. Dr. Foster joined them, her expression mixing excitement with concern. The intelligence community is very interested in these concepts, but implementing them will require cooperation across service branches and agencies that don't always work well together. That's where leadership comes in, Major Chen observed. Sarah, you've proven you can get diverse groups to work together effectively. That skill is going to be crucial in the implementation phase. As the briefing concluded and the team prepared to leave, General Hayes approached Sarah privately. Outstanding presentation. You handled the Joint Chiefs better than most colonels I've seen. Thank you, General. But I have to ask, why me? Why put a cadet in charge of something this important? General Hayes smiled slightly. Because sometimes the most important innovations come from people who don't know what's supposed to be impossible. Your outsider perspective wasn't a liability to overcome. It was the key asset that made this project successful. The general paused, her expression becoming more serious. But the real test starts now. Implementation is always harder than innovation. You'll be working with combat units who have their own ways of doing things, in environments where mistakes have permanent consequences. As Sarah left the Pentagon that afternoon, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had achieved something remarkable, but she also understood that her greatest challenges lay ahead. The theories and frameworks that had impressed the Joint Chiefs would now be tested in the crucible of real-world operations. The girl who had arrived at the Air Force Academy 4 years ago, uncertain whether she belonged and constantly doubting her background, had just briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff on tactical innovations that could reshape modern warfare. But even as she savored this moment of triumph, Sarah knew that her true test was just beginning. The implementation phase would require her to prove that her ideas could work not just in briefing rooms and simulation centers, but in the chaotic, unpredictable reality of urban combat. Everything she had achieved so far had led to this moment, and everything that followed would determine whether she truly deserved the confidence that so many people had placed in her. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the rooftop of a forward operating base in an undisclosed urban combat zone, watching her tactical innovations being implemented in real-time operations. The transition from Academy Cadet to Operational Advisor had been swift and intense, requiring her to adapt to military realities that no simulation could have prepared her for. The field testing of Project Overwatch had exceeded all expectations. In 3 separate operational theaters, the urban systems approach had delivered results that conventional tactics hadn't achieved in years of trying. Enemy forces that had previously melted away at the first sign of military presence were now being systematically identified and neutralized through careful analysis of urban infrastructure patterns. Phoenix Base, this is Raven Squad, came the voice over the radio. We have eyes on the target building. Infrastructure analysis indicates the subjects are using the secondary water main tunnel for movement, just as predicted. End quote. Sarah monitored the operation from the Tactical Operations Center, watching as months of theoretical work played out in real combat conditions. The soldiers implementing her strategies had initially been skeptical, but success had a way of converting even the most traditional thinkers. Captain Maria Rodriguez, the ground commander leading today's operation, had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates after seeing the urban systems approach work repeatedly. Martinez, your people's analysis was spot on again. We've cut off their escape route through the utility corridors. The success was gratifying, but Sarah had learned that real leadership meant focusing on the soldiers, implementing the strategies, rather than taking credit for the results. Outstanding work, Captain. Your team's execution has been flawless. Colonel Thompson, who had been promoted to oversee the Project Overwatch implementation, joined Sarah at the communications station. 3 more successful operations this month. The Joint Chiefs are extremely pleased with the results. Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on the operation in progress. Success in combat zones had taught her that every mission carried risks that no amount of planning could completely eliminate. Raven Squad, be advised that civilian foot traffic in your sector has increased significantly in the past 10 minutes, she radioed to the ground team. Urban systems analysis suggests a possible displacement event. Recommend heightened awareness for secondary escape routes. The warning proved prescient. Within minutes, enemy personnel began emerging from previously unidentified positions, having been flushed out by the civilian movement Sarah's team had detected through their infrastructure monitoring systems. Phoenix Base. This is Raven Actual. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried a note of impressed surprise. How did you know they would try to break out through the commercial district? Urban patterns, Captain, Sarah replied. When civilian foot traffic spikes in a confined area, it usually means residents are leaving the immediate vicinity. In a contested urban environment, that kind of displacement often indicates hidden activity. The operation concluded successfully with minimal engagement and no civilian casualties, a marked contrast to previous missions in the same area that had resulted in prolonged firefights and significant collateral damage. As the tactical teams returned to base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her academy days. The girl who had once doubted whether she belonged in the military had become a trusted advisor to combat commanders operating in some of the most challenging environments in the world. General Hayes arrived at the forward operating base that evening for a scheduled review of Project Overwatch results. Her visit was part of the formal evaluation process that would determine whether the urban systems approach would be adopted as standard doctrine across all service branches. Impressive results, as usual, the general commented as she reviewed the after-action reports. But I'm not here just to discuss tactical successes. We need to talk about your future. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. Throughout her military career, conversations about her future had often brought unexpected challenges and new uncertainties. The Joint Chiefs have been following your work closely, General Hayes continued. Your tactical innovations have proven their value in multiple operational environments. But more importantly, your leadership style has impressed commanders at every level. The general paused, studying Sarah's expression. You've been offered a direct commission as a second lieutenant, with assignment to a newly created Urban Warfare Development Unit. You'd be responsible for training other officers in these methods and continuing to develop new tactical approaches. The offer was everything Sarah had dreamed of during her academy years: recognition, responsibility, and the opportunity to make a lasting impact on military effectiveness. But something in General Hayes' tone suggested there was more to the story. However, the general continued, there's another opportunity that might interest you even more. The Defense Department is creating a joint task force to address emerging threats in urban environments worldwide. It's a high-visibility assignment, with significant autonomy and resources. Sarah waited, sensing that the general was building towards something significant. The task force will need a commanding officer with proven expertise in urban systems analysis and demonstrated ability to work with diverse teams. The position carries the rank of Major, a significant promotion for someone just graduating from the academy. The words hit Sarah like a physical impact. Major was a rank that typically took years to achieve, and command positions at that level usually went to officers with extensive operational experience. General, I'm honored by the consideration, but I have to ask, am I really qualified for that level of responsibility? General Hayes smiled, and Sarah recognized the expression as the same one she'd worn during that first simulation exercise years ago. Sarah, you've been functioning at that level for months. The question isn't whether you're qualified, it's whether you're ready to accept the challenges that come with formal recognition of your capabilities. The general's words echoed conversations Sarah had had with her parents, her teammates, and herself over the past 4 years. The doubts about her background and qualifications had never completely disappeared, but they had transformed from paralyzing fears into motivating challenges. There is one condition, General Hayes added. The task force assignment would require you to work with international partners, NATO allies, and civilian agencies. It's a diplomatic role, as much as a military one. Sarah understood the implication. Success would require the same skills that had made Project Overwatch effective: the ability to build bridges across different perspectives, to find common ground among diverse stakeholders, and to translate innovative concepts into practical applications. I'd also need to ask you about something else, the general continued, her tone becoming more formal. Every officer in a position like this receives a call sign, a operational designation that becomes part of their professional identity. I've been authorized to offer you a specific one that reflects your unique background and achievements. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Call signs were serious business in the military, often reflecting key characteristics or memorable achievements. They became part of an officer's permanent record and professional identity. The call sign would be Phoenix, General Hayes announced. It reflects your ability to rise above challenging circumstances and to create success from situations that others might see as impossible. Aftered, the symbolism wasn't lost on Sarah. The Phoenix was a creature of transformation, rising from ashes to soar higher than before. It represented everything she had experienced over the past 4 years. The struggle to belong, the moments of doubt and fear, and ultimately the emergence of capabilities she had never known she possessed. Phoenix, Sarah repeated quietly, testing how it sounded. I like it. There's also a personal element to this decision, General Hayes continued. Your success has opened doors for other officers from non-traditional backgrounds. The military is watching to see whether innovation and diverse perspectives can consistently produce results. Your continued success would have implications far beyond your own career. The weight of representation was familiar to Sarah, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it had become a source of motivation, driving her to excel not just for herself but for everyone who had faced similar doubts about whether they belonged in spaces where they felt different. When do you need my answer? Sarah asked. The task force is scheduled to begin operations in 6 weeks. But before you decide, there's something else you should know. General Hayes gestured toward the communications station, where Sarah noticed several familiar faces gathering. Colonel Thompson, Major Chen, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, and Dr. Foster had all arrived while she'd been focused on the conversation. Your Project Overwatch team has been selected to form the core of the new task force, the general explained. They've all agreed to continue working with you if you accept the position. Sarah looked at the faces of the people who had become more than colleagues over the past year. They had challenged her, supported her, and helped her develop into the leader she had become. We've worked too hard building this team to break it up now, Colonel Thompson said with a smile. Besides, someone needs to keep you from getting too confident. Major Chen nodded in agreement. The urban systems approach is just the beginning. There are applications we haven't even explored yet. And honestly, Master Sergeant Rodriguez added, working for you has been the most interesting assignment of my career. I'm curious to see what comes next. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she struggled to contain. These professionals, who had initially questioned her qualifications, had become genuine supporters and friends. Their confidence in her leadership meant more than any formal recognition could. Phoenix, she said, addressing General Hayes by the title that would soon become her own operational designation. I accept the position. The celebration that followed was subdued, but meaningful. Sarah's journey from doubted cadet to recognized leader had reached a milestone, but everyone understood that the real work was just beginning. Later that evening, Sarah called her parents from the secure communications facility. Their pride was evident even across the scratchy connection. But it was her father's words that stayed with her. Mija, when you left for the academy, your mother and I hoped you would find a place where you belonged. We never imagined you would help create new places for others to belong to. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she reflected on the transformation that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had arrived at the academy feeling like an outsider had become an officer whose innovations were reshaping military doctrine. The cadet who had doubted her background had learned to see her differences as sources of strength rather than barriers to overcome. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to prove that diverse perspectives and innovative thinking could produce results that traditional approaches might miss. But tonight, for the first time since beginning her military journey, Sarah Martinez, soon to be known as Major Phoenix, fell asleep without doubts about whether she belonged. She had not only found her place in the military, she had helped create new spaces where others like her could thrive. The Phoenix had indeed risen from the ashes of doubt and uncertainty, soaring toward a future filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The announcement of her call sign would come the next morning, in front of the entire unit, marking the official beginning of her new role. But the transformation it represented had been years in the making, forged through struggle, doubt, determination, and ultimately the recognition that being different wasn't something to overcome. It was something to embrace and leverage for the greater good. As dawn broke over the forward operating base, Major Sarah Phoenix Martinez prepared to step into a future where her background would no longer be a source of doubt, but a foundation for continued innovation and leadership in service of her country.